It is Wednesday, September 14th, and welcome to a very special episode of Plugged In from YAA Electric. My name is Justin Fisher. Today, we are joined by the one and only Kyle Connor. Kyle, how are you doing this morning? It's early over there in Colorado.
It really is early over here. And yeah, doing great. Already been to the Tesla service center this morning
Wow.
and already swung by my local charging station this morning. So been up and around doing stuff.
Yeah, Colorado is the EV capital of America, maybe besides California. But yeah, I envy what you guys have out there. I'm wearing my Colorado swag this morning in
Ah,
honor
nice.
of, yeah, the big CO up there. But yeah, honestly, I was just sharing with you that I have an Ionic 5 and I probably would have bought a Model Y if I had a Tesla service station anywhere close to where I live in West Virginia. West Virginia has, I think, the second lowest EV adoption rate in the nation. So I'm definitely I'm an oddball out there driving my Ionic 5 around, but yeah, I got to make it up to Colorado and see what all those EV incentives are doing to the automotive market around there.
Yeah, we have an incentive that's sort of fading away at the moment. And I think it's more of a lifestyle thing than it is a monetary benefit.
Yeah.
A lot of people just here, I think, are pretty forward thinking. Depending on what side of Colorado you're in, of course, you go up into the mountains, you get more trucks and things. So it just depends on the area.
Yeah, yeah. Well, most of our viewers probably know who you are and the awesome stuff you create. You want to go ahead and introduce your content to the YAA family?
Yeah. So basically, I'm just a car enthusiast. I'm actually a combustion car enthusiast at heart, which hurts a lot of people. But I really love electric. I own a whole bunch of electric cars. I review them for a living. And yeah, so we have a collection of YouTube channels under the Out of Spec Studios umbrella. And we produce content ranging from hardcore off-road content to nerding out about charging curves about electric vehicles. So and everything in between. So we produce videos every day, and we're lucky we get to do what we love to do for work.
Yeah, I love the diversity of content you guys produce, and that's an awesome goal to strive towards. And yeah, it's wonderful. Keep that off-road content coming because it's amazing. I remember when you took the Volkswagen ID4 off-road, and
Yes.
it's like, how's it gonna do? How's it gonna do? Because I mentioned we also thought about the Model Y, but we were pretty close to going for the ID4. But honestly, one thing kept me from the ID4. It wasn't even the charging infrastructure, charging capabilities not being as good as the Ionic 5. It was honestly the laggy infotainment screen that broke the sale for me. But yeah, at that point, whenever you released that video, I was thinking about the ID4. I was like, can it do it? And then when it couldn't do it, I honestly just thought to myself, like, when am I going to be taking the ID4 into the mountains? Probably never. But I love that content.
Yeah, thanks for watching. Appreciate it. And that's kind of the stuff we do, and more of it all coming starting in January. So we're in prep time for next year, basically, to crank the dial up to 12.
Awesome. And how many hours of your life do you think you've spent on range tests at this point?
Oh, way too many. Range tests are the worst thing ever because A, range doesn't even matter in an electric car, in my opinion, once you get over a certain number. And B, they take so much time. And if you hit even a bit of traffic, the whole test is screwed. So
Yeah.
range testing's terrible. We do it because people watch and people are very interested in it. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. Cars all go pretty far. If you get into these big battery EVs, they all go far enough.
Yeah, yeah, bladder of steel, I'm guessing. But um so thinking about what you guys are doing there, how how much have you gotten into international travel lately? Because honestly, I've seen through your content, you've been in Europe quite a bit lately, and it seems like charging in Europe, which that's the topic we're going to get into mostly today. Charging in Europe seems to be not quite as much of a hassle as what we find here.
Yeah, well, there's some things that are worse. So we're off opening an office in Munich, just outside of Munich, and so I've been doing the commute back and forth from Colorado over to Germany, and we drive electric cars over in Germany as well for videos. And the infrastructure, first of all, is so much more plentiful, and partly is they just have a higher voltage network all around. So level two chargers typically go up to 11 to 22 kilowatts. Where
Ah,
here we're between six and, like, if you find anything more than 12, you're like, wow, that's pretty amazing. So basically, they run on a three phase system for AC. So there's a ton of pretty high power level 2 chargers all around, installed in every parking garage. And this is, specifically in some of the built up cities, especially in Germany. But then their high power charging infrastructure is just amazing. I mean, almost every exit in mainland Germany, in sort of the high traffic areas, but from Dusseldorf to Munich, this L, every exit pretty much has 300 kilowatt plus charging with multiple stalls, with everything pretty much in working order.
That was the
It's amazing.
question I had. Like, does it work?
Yes, it works really well. But it was a rocky road at the beginning. Back when infrastructure went in, there was a need for high power charging infrastructure with the cars, but the actual chargers themselves couldn't output what the cars were taking.
Uh,
And the ones that could weren't reliable, and they were crazy expensive. And we're still sort of in this state where the cars are way ahead of just the infrastructure technology itself, forgetting even if you put them in the ground. They're just not reliable, expensive, cumbersome, and really terrible quality.
Yeah, I recall maybe, I don't know at this point, time kind of falls apart after the pandemic, but 3, 4, maybe 5 years ago when a lot of the European chargers that various content producers were showing, especially Bjorn, I feel like a lot of them were maybe 55 to 75 kilowatt max output. Is that like the kind of now outdated infrastructure you're talking about?
Yeah, so there was a lot of 50 kilowatt infrastructure in the ground. Actually, a lot of it's held up pretty well because it's
That's
low
good.
power. And so, it's really when we started to push the needle, pushing 350 kilowatts, which is 500 amps up to 700 volts and higher. um this is when the technology just wasn't really equipped to handle that level of charging power, and be used by the general public, getting thrashed around, cables getting thrown on the ground, huge temperature swings, big thermal loads, or I should say solar loads from the sun. These chargers don't live an easy life. And we look back today, it's a huge investment today to put in a high power charging station. And if you look back, at stations that were put in 3+ years ago in the EV charging world, those things are ancient. So
Yeah.
imagine trying to put in a charger and say this thing's only going to have a 3-year lifespan. That's the state of where we are today.
Yeah, I can't help but wonder if one of the secrets to success for Tesla's network is what one of the Tesla service technicians told me at a supercharger not too long ago. He said that they plan to maintain them. I believe it was before it gets to 1600 charging cycles or usage points, right?
Yep.
So
hmm
that's impressive because Electrify America, at least as of a few weeks ago, they had said that they try to check on them. What is it? Once every 6 months or 2 months, something like that.
I mean, who really knows at
Yeah,
the end
yeah,
of the day? Tesla used to be every 1,000 charging cycles would replace cables. Now they're going up to 1,600. Part of that is because the cable itself is the part that gets abused the most. That's what
uh,
the user's interacting with. They get thrown on the ground, they get run over, they get real nasty, and they really have these tiny little connections that are pushing a ton of power. In the case of Tesla, we're talking about 650 plus amps with their two little tiny DC pins, and that just creates a lot of resistance over time, and so they need to be swapped out.
yeah. That's pretty fascinating. Have you ever seen one of the Model Ys or Model X's that has been retrofitted to be a Tesla service vehicle? How they really just take out the back and put all the toolkits in the back, and he opened up the front, and in the front it was just full of charging cables. I was like, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, so they have like Tesla Energy, I think they're branded, or Tesla Supercharger specific service built out vehicles, and they're awesome. It's like, wow, that's my dream to have one of those because for nerd level 9,000 people like me, I mean, just having a car to go around and have all your charging stuff in there is pretty amazing. And they go out and they fix stations and their life out on the road. And I know the guy that services our local Colorado Superchargers. They're just nice people. They're
Yeah.
really good people out there fixing the chargers.
Yeah, and the electrician we have that's the regional Tesla service technician in my area, he's so thankful to be able to work for Tesla in the middle of West Virginia. I live in a pretty rural area, so it's just really cool that the EV revolution's kind of spreading this way to every corner of the country. But that really makes me think about the Tesla charging experience compared to what I experience in the Ionic 5, which is mostly Electrify America. I stop by the other networks occasionally. In your experiences and with the people you've spoken to, why do you think there's such a huge difference in the customer experience at a Tesla Supercharger versus Electrify America when it comes to charger uptime? Yeah, just what is the secret to success? Have you figured that out?
Yeah, well, Tesla's figured it out, that's for sure, which is you buy a car, you buy into the charging network, and then all of the communication, everything is done by Tesla. So total vertical integration. And that's also maybe very surface level because Tesla did an amazing job designing and engineering hardware that's reliable and quick to deploy at scale at very reasonable cost compared to any competitor. And so when you look at version 3 supercharging, which is pretty much what's being installed today, they're pretty much just pre-built on the back of a truck and they slap this sucker in the ground. And you're getting, 4 to 8 stalls, all outputting 250 kilowatts or more. And, it's just so easy to do it. So Tesla's experience is the quickest to install. You roll up, you plug in, it just works because it's all vertically integrated. Now, Electrify America and other charging providers like ChargePoint, EVgo, Greenlots, etc. here in the US, Blink, um, they have a much harder task because those are network operators, not charging hardware manufacturers. So those network operators are going out and buying what other people are making and then adapting this hardware to work for their use case and then adapting that hardware to work with every electric car on the market. And
Yeah.
that's a very complicated process. And it gets, the more removed you are from actual vertical integration, the harder it is to make it all work reliably.
Yeah, no, I've been trying to figure out, is this mostly a software issue or mostly a hardware issue? And from what I've seen anecdotally in the states I travel in, which are mostly North Carolina and Virginia, um, it seems like it's both, to be honest. I mean, there will be days where I've had Electrify America charging stalls that they're not marked as offline on the app. When you pull up to them, it does not say unavailable, but I'll plug in, can't connect. Mustang Mach-E will pull up, they'll try, they can't connect. So it seems like it's got to be both from what I've seen.
Yeah, totally. I mean, look, at the end of the day, Tesla is a software company first and then hardware second, but they do hardware really well. And
Yeah.
if you look at anyone else, they're not hardware or software companies trying to make all this stuff work. They're just network operators. And it becomes very difficult. Now, I definitely agree. Hardware is a big component of this, and there's some news that maybe we'll talk about a little bit where hardware is actually being swapped out for newer stuff, which we should discuss. But at the end of the day, charging should be simple, but it's very far from it and it's very expensive. And so, yeah, Tesla makes it simple. So, for people who take long road trips, my parents, for example, and they don't want to deal with having to, go to this charging company and fiddle with this app and worry about getting there if it works, I just hardcore recommend just get a Tesla. Now, not everyone wants to drive a Tesla, and I certainly fall into that category. I own two of them, but I'm also a car nerd, so I can appreciate what other cars bring to the market that Tesla can't give me. Build quality, certain driving dynamics, things like this that I just don't get from the Tesla experience. And yeah, just recently got back from about a 2,500-mile road trip in the new BMW iX.
Nice.
And, that car is so much quieter than any Tesla could ever be. So, yeah,
Yeah,
that's an example.
I had the weirdest experience the other day. I know someone with a Model Y, and I hadn't sat in one in about a year. I mean, when I thought I was going to buy a Model Y, you would laugh at how many times I test drove them. You know how you can just book your test drive online and show up and hop in the car and drive around for 30 minutes. Yeah, I did that like 6 or 7 times. And then I didn't even buy the car. But I hadn't sat in one in about a year, and I've had my Ionic 5 for about 6 or 7 months now and already put 12,000 miles on it. But getting back into the Model Y, I didn't miss anything. I kind of really like my Ionic 5's, you know, atmosphere. It's aesthetic on the inside, and I already know that it's a lot quieter on the highway. But what I do miss is the expectation I had when I assumed I would end up being a Tesla owner, that I would just have the supercharger network everywhere. Like I assumed that was the future that I had ahead of me, was the wonderful supercharger network. Here in West Virginia, we have 10 or 11 supercharger locations, not a single Electrify America location. No EVgo, a few charge points, level 2, but in the East Coast, we're the only state that is truly a charging desert for non-Tesla owners. But then there's that news that it looks pretty likely that at some point in 2023, the supercharger network will open at least on a limited scale to non-Tesla owners. You and I were both kind of skeptical. I just know from watching your videos that, like, I don't know, 6 months or a year ago, I recall you saying you didn't quite think it would ever really happen in the U.S. And I was definitely in that camp. But once believe it was the federal funding opportunities that started to bubble up for growing charging networks in the United States, I think that might have been what switch Tesla to the other side. But with that said, with the likelihood of the supercharger network opening up, do you see this as a positive thing or a bit of a mixed bag? Because I want to see what you think, but then I'll tell you where I'm at.
Oh, totally mixed, and it depends on
Yeah.
which car I'm driving that day. If I'm driving my new Model S that I just spent my hard-earned money on, I don't want to roll up to a charger and have to wait for a bolt to finish charging.
Boom. That's it.
You
Yes.
know, that's going to suck. On the other hand, if I roll up to a charger and there's 50 open stalls and a bolt happens to be charging there, what do I care as long as I'm getting juice? On the other hand, when I'm driving a BMW iX and I roll up to an Electrify America charger with one of four working, I'm like, dang, how nice would it be just to go down the street, just charge up at the supercharger enough to get me to the next station. And so it just depends on what I'm doing. Either way, I don't think it matters how we feel. They're going to open up the network. And I
Yeah.
think it's going to be very similar to how they've done it in Europe. And I've charged both Teslas and non-Teslas at superchargers in Europe now, and it works really well. Granted, I would say the European mindset is different, and it's different country by country than it is here in America. Everyone's much more, open to this type of thing over there. But you definitely get a couple dirty looks rolling up in a Polestar to a supercharger. But overall, it works pretty well there, and they do it just in the generally low traffic stations are open at the moment. It's not every supercharger that can charge every EV.
Yeah, that's what I'd imagine would happen in the United States first, but we'll see what they've got up their sleeves. Um, are there any signs that the latest generation of Electrify America chargers is any better? Because I know you and your dad, I love his content too. Released some videos of talking about that.
Yeah, so we just had our chance to experience the new hardware. And just to put this in perspective, Electrify America had to select from, like I mentioned, their network operators. They don't design their own hardware. So when they were tasked from Dieselgate to build up this network as a punishment, they basically said, "Okay, let's we got to buy hardware. What's on the market?" And they bought everything they could. And charging hardware cost went through the roof because, hey, you got this player that's got to spend a ton of money here. It's like medical equipment. We're jacking up the prices and no one else can get it. And it really pushed everyone else out of the market that was coming in. EA bought all the hardware, and they bought honestly the best stuff that they could buy, which was pretty much everything. And at this moment in time, a lot of it's been installed in the ground for 2 or 3 years. It's been hot summers, heavy utilization. Like I mentioned, these high power chargers don't seem to be lasting more than 2 or 3 years before major failures. And that's what we're seeing. So, Electrify America over the last couple years, is my understanding. Again, I don't represent their company at all. They mentioned that they have been working really hard to engineer a new next generation charger solution that's designed for the heavy workloads that they're seeing out in the field. They have more data than anyone as to how these chargers are being used. So they've spec'd and built this new hardware with both BTC and SK Signet as their suppliers, and they're actually starting with ripping out older hardware and putting new stations in. And our local station here, that's where I was at this morning, is, I believe, the first to be updated with the new hardware.
Wow, that's fascinating. Man, and I'm seeing some uh, comments in the chat that are just kind of blowing my mind right now. We got a lot of people fired up about this whole supercharger growth. I didn't even know Boone, North Carolina was getting a supercharger.
Yes.
I lived there for 2 years. I love Boone. That's like, I kind of feel like I'm from there. It's weird.
Yeah,
Uh,
Boone needs it. Anytime you go to Blowing Rock, it was such a pain because you'd have to use your Tesla CHAdeMO adapter for that one CHAdeMO station at the library in Boone. And it would be like such a pain to get around. And now
yeah,
you do like a full charge in Hickory, drive up, and Tesla is just killing it with installing new chargers. There's a great website called supercharge.info that you can use to track the progress of all supercharging stations going in.
Yeah, and I can't help but expect Elon to charge us non-Tesla owners 69 cents a kilowatt hour to charge on their network next year. And honestly, I'd be okay with it if it funds the growth of the network, which I could see that it'd be a bit of an awkward point, a transition period in 2023 and 2024 as us non-Tesla drivers start to flood this supercharger network. But if it funds the growth of the network to just unimaginable growth, that would be great. I'll pay
It
69
wouldn't.
cents a kilowatt hour.
I don't even think at 69 cents a kilowatt hour they'll be making a ton of money. The
Oh,
thing is,
yeah.
charging needs to get more expensive. And I hate to say that because charging should be cheaper from a user standpoint. But for any of this to work, we need to make a business case for high power DC charging. There needs to be a model where someone can make money somewhere. Tesla's figured it out because they sell cars. And
Yeah.
if they can increase their total utilization, they have less demand charges at their station. But in Europe, we're talking many stations are almost $1 a kilowatt hour. Really not cheap.
Yeah, that's not
Um,
cheap.
Not cheap, but it's honestly, even then, they're not making much money.
Yeah, I wonder how much free charging incentives like the one that my car comes with or the Volkswagen ID.4, etcetera. I wonder how much that has really pressure tested the non-Tesla networks like Electrify America, EVgo, etcetera. Like, on one hand, I've heard people say that free charging incentives are killing charging in America. On the other hand, this is nothing like what we'd be seeing usage rates be like in a few years from now. If EV adoption rates continue, we're at 5.5% right now. But if this trajectory continues, we can't be complaining about how much these chargers are being used right now because they're going to be used a hell of a lot more in like 2 years. What's your
Yeah,
take on
well,
that?
yeah, I think free charging disincentivizes proper charging behavior
Yeah.
in general, because the whole idea for DC charging infrastructure is to get you from metropolitan area to the next metropolitan area. And occasionally you may need to use it around town for a quick top up. But the thing is, DC charging, if you look at like the overall cost, is more expensive than fuel in many cases, especially when towing with trucks. Now that fuel costs have kind of settled back down, it's more expensive to tow with an electric truck than a gas truck. But I think DC charging infrastructure, it's okay for it to be expensive, because if 90% of your charging is done at home, you save all that money to then go out on a trip and do it once in a while. If you have free charging on your ID.4 or Ionic 5 or EV6 or whatever it is, you roll up to a charger. Right now, the infrastructure, we kind of need as much availability as possible. And we're not seeing the build out as fast as cars are being sold. And I think it's only going to get worse over the next few years from this standpoint. But yeah, I think free charging needs to go away. I really do. Tesla's proven you don't need it to sell a car. You don't need tax credits to sell a car. You don't need free charging to sell a car. Tesla's still smoking everyone in sales.
Yeah, and I know I bring up a lot of rumors on this show, but I've also heard some say that when Tesla opens up the network to the rest of us and makes us pay, maybe Tesla would bring back free charging for like the Model 3 or something. I personally don't buy that because of everything you just mentioned.
No, there's no way. And, I can see the comments as well. And someone's like, people aren't going to switch to electric at $1 a kilowatt hour. I agree. That's probably a bit too expensive. But I think your goal and my goal isn't to convince people to switch to electric. It's just to share, here's what's going on and here's what we need to make this work. Electric isn't going to work for many people for a long time to come.
Yeah, and something that I share with a lot of locals who ask me about my car because you really don't see EVs around here is that if we can find a way as a nation to get beyond the charging anxieties that we currently and justifiably have, especially if you don't own a Tesla, because what we've been talking about, charging is kind of a mess if when you're not charging at home. If we can find a way to get beyond that as a nation, I feel like the masses would see the other like the benefits of owning an EV, because if you don't have to think about where am I going to charge when I'm on the highway, and you can just enjoy the silence, the rapid torque, and the instant torque and all that. I feel like there are so many benefits to having an EV that we kind of don't talk enough about because we're focused on fixing the system.
Yeah, well, you're 100% correct. And what I've been saying for the last few years is the cars are fine. They all go long enough. Range really isn't an issue. The comfort of the cars, the speed, the cars are great. It's all about the charging infrastructure. Everything else is very nice about having a daily driver that's electric. I think there's a few areas such as heavy use towing where EVs are really not working, such as performance driving. If you're looking for a really fun experience, I've yet to drive an EV that like makes me want to get in it and go for a canyon blast. Even and I've driven them all, but I think overall for daily driving, why do we have to burn something to go out to dinner and back or go out to work and back? It'd be cool just to plug it in at home and then do that. That's where EVs work the best. The problem is EVs are really expensive, way too expensive for many people at this moment.
Yes,
And so that you can't just buy an EV to say, hey, I'm just going to use it for these few things. And then I'm going
exactly.
to have a diesel truck for towing, and then I'm going to have a Porsche 911 for the canyons. Not everyone is, fortunate enough to do that. And so an EV needs to do everything. And if it can't do the long distance stuff as easily as combustion, then it's not doing everything.
Yeah, here at YA Electric, we try to basically take away the guesswork from trying to figure out if an EV makes sense for today's buyer. And we often tell people, like, if they let us know that they only drive 5 to 10,000 miles a year, maybe they live in multifamily housing or something like that. I've honestly said, wait it out or consider a plug-in hybrid if you really want to go electric. Uh, because not every use case makes sense for an EV right now, and I think more of us in the EV space should be honest about that. Most people are, but like an EV doesn't make sense for everyone. I feel like I have a crystal clear view of that because of where I live in West Virginia. Some parts of West Virginia, you're 50 miles from a Walmart, let alone any charger, right? So, yeah, it's very, very fascinating. You've mentioned the amount of range that you think an EV should have at a minimum to just not have to worry about it. In my opinion, it's 250. What's your opinion?
Yeah, I think it just depends on the infrastructure installed. Like I road tripped a Mini Cooper SE with 100 miles of range down the whole East Coast. And so for me, like the total initial charging range of the car doesn't really matter so much. I'd be fine with, yeah, I think 150, 200 miles realistically. Like we have an Audi e-tron that we drive for the most part around town. This is my girlfriend's car, and it does like 180 miles on the highway. But like it's never been a problem. Like we use 10% of that car a day at most. And so it just depends on what you're doing with it. But the more infrastructure we have, the better the cars charge in terms of their overall charging curve. If you can charge deeper into the pack at higher power levels, means you may not need as many batteries in there. For example, your Ionic 5 doesn't have a very big battery pack in it compared to a Model Y or a Mustang Mach E. And those cars are, well, the Model Y is more efficient, but Mach-E's got a much bigger battery pack and goes farther. But you make up for it with your charging speed, which
Yes.
when you're on a trip, you plug in, you're like 10 minutes, you're ready to get the heck out of there. And so charging infrastructure, the more we have, the less reliance we need on big batteries to haul around in cars.
Yeah, totally agree. It's going to get a little bit messy in the next few years, especially with the new EV incentives, because I think more people will buy EVs if they can find them affordably. But I see a near future where you're going to have more Chevy Bolts, Nissan Leafs. They might be discontinued, but Kia Niros, Hyundai Konas, slower charging EVs becoming more common at charging stations. And then it's going to make it a little bit more difficult for those of us with faster charging EVs to get in and out of there as we like to. So we'll
Totally.
see.
Well, there's a way around that too, which is there's newer technology coming out to build out charging stations which have a centralized power source. It's like a load distribution essentially, and that then distributes the power across the whole network site. So what you can do this way is, the cables are relatively expensive, but nowhere near as expensive as the actual charging power needed. So if you can design a system that has like a overall maximum of, let's just say, 1 megawatt that it can disperse at any time, then you could really put 10 or 15 or 20 posts all hooked up into this 1 megawatt system, and it can load balance everything. So if you have a whole bunch of slow charging cars and then you roll up in a Lucid Air or a Taycan, everything's going to get maxed out, and that way you don't have any unused charging power that's just sitting there that costs so much money to put in the ground.
So in that case, you would just want to not park next to each other, like the version 2 Tesla Superchargers, right?
Oh no, at this you could plug into anywhere because it's just
Oh, okay,
one
okay.
centralized source that distributes across the whole thing. What you're mentioning is like an A-B split, which is a
Yeah.
full split of charging. And this is where Electrify America is going with their new units. They call it balanced with their new terminology. And there, for example, yeah, if one car is charging on, let's say, A, you wouldn't want to plug into B you'd want to go to a totally different charging power solution.
I would take that over the current scenario where it seems like 90% of EV drivers that pull up to Electrify America don't even look at the max output on the stall. That has been an interesting experience, but I've refrained from confronting anyone about that because I like to think that I'm a nice guy, but at some point it may become necessary.
Yeah, I mean, at least with EA, you're never going to get less than 150 kilowatts
Yeah.
across the network. And so that's pretty livable no matter kind of what you're driving.
Yeah. Comment from the chat. How do we think the new tax credits, which we're not going to dive into all that mess because it's a mess, trust me. We've done so many shows on that. How do you think the new tax credits will affect Model Y sales? Will the Model Y thrive under the new environment? I think it will.
I mean, it's thriving now without them. So why
Yeah.
do we even need it?
Yeah.
My argument is why incentivize all of this if it all works today? Like Tesla has a backlog of orders for so
Mhm.
long. Why do those cars need incentives?
Yeah, I agree. To me, the incentives should be focused on affordability, and for those who need help getting to that price point, I don't think an $80,000 car needs incentives at all. But that's my opinion, and I know Ray and I have argued that one out a few times on the show. So
Yeah, I just like I don't understand why my hard-earned tax dollars need to go to fund some dude to buy a Model Y. Like
yeah,
if we're talking about someone who's stretching to get into a $15,000 car and they need, transportation that's reliable and they're looking at a used Bolt or i3 or something, that's a better use of that money in my opinion.
yeah, I would have taken a big chunk of the money that has been allocated for the new EV incentives and made the used EV incentives more generous because what kind of blew our mind, at least from our perspective, is that like an $80,000 electric SUV still qualifies for incentives. That's a pretty expensive vehicle. However, the price caps on the used EVs it's pretty low. It's like $25,000. Um, you're gonna be hard pressed to find an EV that you'd want to keep for a while for $25,000. So I can't help but wonder if maybe they should have lowered that cap and raised the used vehicle cap. But here I am talking about the tax credits. Like I said, I wouldn't.
Yeah, well, just never leave it up to the government is what we've learned out of all of
Yeah.
this.
Yes, yes. Another good question we had from the chat. Oh, I lost it. Okay, so I'm gonna move. I'm gonna move on to a topic that I had on my little list of things I gotta talk to Kyle about: the national charging network. Now, I don't know how deep into this you are, but $7.5 billion has been allocated to be dispersed over 5 years to all 50 states in the District of Columbia and I believe Puerto Rico to build out a national charging network. It's got some requirements like they've got to be DC fast chargers. They have to be along alternative fuel corridors, which were, established a decade ago. Basically, America's interstates and major highways are going to get some federally funded fast chargers. What could possibly go wrong? Oh, this gives me a lot of anxiety.
Yeah, but it's interesting because this has sparked up the whole industry at the moment. So you can see some of the European charging manufacturers are starting to get their stations UL
Ooh,
certified, IEEE, blah blah
I want
blah,
to know more
all of
about
this stuff.
that.
Yeah, so ChemPower is coming to the US as an example. I think largely sparked by a lot of this conversation of there's money to be spent. Like I said, leave it up to the government. Not everything is perfect. There's no major funds allocated towards servicing any of this hardware. We mentioned early, most DC infrastructure is dying after 2 or 3 years. So, is this the best way to go about it? I don't know. So yeah, I mean, it really comes down to are the stations going to be high power, reliable, installed in the best possible places to ensure long distance travel? And the answer is probably not every installation is going to fit into that category. And so there are going to be some issues.
Yes, we published a resource on YAA about every state's EV charging plans. I dug up the Department of Transportation plans at the state level for every single state, and it's what they submitted to the Department of Transportation federally to try to get their proposals funded, basically. And I'll drop that in the chat for anyone who's watching. What I've found is that at least in my state, the plan really checks out. The locations that they've proposed are excellent for the needs of our state. However, and I know that there's federal requirements such as they have to have, I forget the acronym, but it's basically open source software. That would be great, but I'm still just worried about will these chargers end up being maintained, things like that. Things that we can't really know what the outcome is going to be, but I'm just hoping for the best.
Yeah, and think about it from the other side too. When you have a lot of money being spent in an area similar to when EA bought up all the chargers, the price of these charging cables are going to be 20, $30,000. That's kind of what they're going for now. So they're like, yeah, you got to spend the money anyway. We're jacking up our prices. And I'm not sure that really helps everyone in the long run. So I think it's a really good patch short term. I think it delays the possibility of finding a free market profitable charging solution for someone like you or I to start up a charging company one day, because there's all this money that someone else is spending and maybe we can apply for some of it, but it's just, evens out the playing field a little bit for the short term. And then I think we'll be having these exact conversations that we're having now: chargers dying, people stranded in just another few years after this.
Yes, yes. Another topic that I felt like you'd be the one to ask, Kyle, is about battery swapping. Because I'll be honest, we've got both EV enthusiasts and EV newcomers here on our channel, and honestly, I've seen a trend among what seems like to be quite often combustion enthusiasts, and they're thinking about the EV lifestyle and what would possibly lure them over to the other side. And I've heard time and time again, battery swapping. Why don't you guys just swap batteries? Some of these people have never even heard of Neo, but they're like, why don't you just swap batteries? Do you think the situation we're seeing here in the US right now with some of the non-Tesla networks, you know, I don't want to say failing, but sometimes failing, and then the possibility of the Tesla supercharger network becoming crowded pretty soon, could this be what Neo has been waiting for to really enter the US market?
Well, Neo's not built out a massive network of battery swap stations outside of China. They
Okay.
have one in Oslo. They have one being built in Zusmarshausen, which is just outside of Munich. And as far as I know, those are the only two in Europe.
I didn't know
Uh,
they only had like one in Oslo. I thought they had already built that out more extensively in Europe.
my understanding is there's just one, maybe I would say less than 10 for sure.
Okay. Yeah.
For sure. I mean, it's not like you're going to go road trip a Neo and swap around. Most
Ah,
people are charging up on long trips. Battery swapping works for dense urban populated areas of which everyone shares a common battery pack type. And so it works for a manufacturer led project because they're all using the same battery pack. It also may limit innovation in those cars into the future, because now you got to get them all fitting in into this one battery swap station. But battery swapping sounds great on the surface because it only takes 6 minutes at Neo, and then you're in and out, right? That's pretty awesome. But if we look at one of the better charging EVs on the market, which is the Porsche Taycan, that takes 10 minutes to charge, just as an example, from 0 to 50%, which is what you would do on a trip anyway. And then, use that bottom half of the battery pack. It's exactly 10-minute dead to 50. And in a Neo, what you're going to be doing is rolling up to a station. One car goes in, it's set for 6 minutes. Then you come up, now you're waiting for 6 minutes. And then the car behind them is waiting for 6 minutes.
it adds up quickly.
By the time you're like third in line, why not just plug in, DC
Yeah.
charge and go? And so, everything is capacity reach, but it's very expensive, just like charging, to install battery swap stations. You're not getting your battery pack. Thankfully, you can just swap it out and get another one. I don't think people really care about which battery they have, but when you start getting into selling your car, looking at battery degradation, are you just going to keep swapping them at the stations? But I think we need a mix of all of this technology. We need a mix of wireless charging. We need a mix of battery swapping technology. I just think in the US, we have such huge landscape that no matter what happens for the foreseeable future and pretty much forever, charging is going to be the way to fuel up your car. And it's easy because you just pull it in at home and plug in. For the people who live in apartments in urban areas, that's where a battery swap station could be pretty helpful. Book an appointment in advance, roll up. 6 minutes later, you got yourself a full charge. Because again, full charging an EV at a charger takes a long time, and then you're ready to rock and roll. So I think that's not a bad solution to add to the mix.
Yeah. So we need diversification, but I think that'll take a decade. We'll see.
Oh yeah, probably longer.
Yeah, and VinFast. VinFast is building their massive factory in Chatham County, North Carolina. I also used to live in that area. I've been all over the place, it seems. But
Yeah.
uh, VinFast, I'm a big fan of the way that they're bringing three-row SUVs to America, because we need more affordable electric three-row SUVs. I've had some pushback on that, which is surprising to me. But I have a 6-year-old, and honestly, anyone with a family, a larger family, a Model Y not be big enough, might not be big enough for them. So I'm a big fan of VinFast, but I wanted to see what you thought about the battery subscription model because I see the positives and the negatives, but I still just personally wouldn't want to pay $200 a month for a VF9 battery subscription.
Yeah, I think what they're trying to do is to remove the barrier to entry into their car. So they're trying to remove the price of the vehicle and then charging you a subscription all the time. The thing is, people aren't paying for cars in cash for the most of them. So it's not
Financing,
like,
yeah.
yeah. So like, okay, finance an extra $200 a month anyway, and then you get to keep the damn battery that's in there. So that's where my head's at. Smart tried to do battery leasing in the US. Renault has done it quite successfully in the UK, but it just adds a lot of complication. Woohoo, Stuart, thanks. It adds a lot of complication later on into the ownership experience. For example, in the US, if you owned a VF9 and wanted to sell it to me, right? You would say, "Hey, Kyle, I own the car outright. I hold the title in hand," which is rare, I understand, for a new car. But let's say you sign the title over to me, right? Thanks. I now assumed ownership of the car. I go to DMV, register it. That's my vehicle. And then you call me a week later and you say, "Oh, crap, Kyle, I just realized I don't actually own the battery. Here's this document for you to sign so you can assume the battery of my car." And I'll be like, "No, I have the title. Like, you come and take my battery. You don't come on my property. This is my car. I show you right here. I own the thing. The battery pack's a part of the car. I own that." And so this is what was happening with smart owners in the US. And I actually bought a used electric smart car years ago from someone who originally leased the battery pack. And I was like two removed. And the dude was like, "Yeah, I never assumed the battery pack leasing. So I don't know." And I'm like, "Okay, so I'm owning the car." And I like kept it in the garage. I'm like waiting for a whole bunch of black smart cars to roll up with guys in suits to steal my battery pack because I never signed the lease agreement. But it never happened. I think the whole idea just failed. Um, I think VinFast is trying something different, and props to them for trying. You can also have the option to just buy out your battery pack. I think it's 15 grand or something like that.
Yeah, it's a lot. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
but I think worth it. And I think if you're going to sell the car to Carvana, to Vroom, if you're going to sell it privately or trade it in, they're going to want that battery lease, sort of signed, returned in full, and going. Now, if you sell it back to VinFast, maybe that's a much smoother process. If you trade it in for another car, they'll probably be able to handle all of that. Personally, I don't like the idea of it, but hopefully it will help reduce the burden to get into the car. But again, you're still paying $200 a month, whether you finance it with your original contractual sale or you lease the thing.
Yes, yes. Good little question in the chat here. Silly question, but why can't we just duplicate what Europe is doing since they seem to be doing it so well? We kind of touched on that, but Kyle, would you say that Europe's just different from the US? We're so geographically spread out. Yeah, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes down from a reliability standpoint to the hardware that they have available. And I'm hoping that this new hardware that Electrify America helped to develop, that's being installed literally today at my local station, I'm hoping that this can be on the same level playing field as what we've seen in Europe. The thing is, no matter what, there's these Alpitronic units in Europe that are becoming hugely popular and hugely reliable and hugely compact. All of the charging process is done in the unit. You don't need to run huge cables underground to an off-board charger somewhere else. It works really well. And so a lot of it just comes down to hardware. As soon as we get good hardware, we might have better charging experiences here.
Yeah. I wonder I know I'm switching back to another topic we brought up, but I was thinking about Tesla again and how so much of what we are talking about right now could be changing rapidly if the supercharger network opens up in the US. I wonder if there would be a benefit to bringing back charging uh, per minute for non-Tesla owners because of like the thought of a Nissan Leaf sitting there for 55 minutes.
Right. So billing by per minute does incentivize higher throughput because you don't want to spend as much time there. But at the end of the day, you can offset that by just putting more plugs in. If you have enough infrastructure to support this, and again, the way to do that is by having a centralized charging source and then dispersing the power across the entire site. It's not that much more expensive to add more plugs.
Okay.
That's the way to get around it. And I think it's much more fair to bill by the kilowatt hour versus, disincentivizing someone or I would say putting an unfair financial burden on someone who's stretched into a Nissan Leaf
Yeah.
for, $6,000, and they're just trying to get to work, and now we're hammering them because their inexpensive car charges really slow. I don't think that's the solution. I think you bill
Mhm.
by unit of energy.
Yeah, we try to advocate for considering the more affordable EV options right now because if you don't travel all the time, I mean, I travel personally pretty often. I know you do too, but most Americans don't travel as much as we do. A lot of these more affordable options should definitely not be overlooked because they're great for like urban driving use cases and whatnot. So it
Yeah,
was really sad to see that the Leaf might be on its way out.
yeah, but the new Leaf isn't that affordable. The Bolt smokes it right now, and so
26,000. Yeah.
yeah, and the Bolt's got CCS and it's better. But we're about to start a used EV series where we're actually going to be
Great.
going and buying these cars, and we're going to have a 20 or 25 limit, $25,000 limit on it used, and we're going to buy a whole bunch of these things and experience them. Or I don't know how we're going to do it yet, but we're going to figure out which one is best.
Oh man, I wonder. Oh, so first of all, is it through one of those dealerships that you have in Colorado that sells only electrified vehicles?
No, we have
Oh,
no
okay.
partnerships for it. I'm just going to have
Cool,
to
cool.
write a lot of checks, and then we'll have to sell them at the end of it.
You have to start a new savings account just for the possibility of like the batteries going out and being worth more than the vehicle, but I hope that doesn't happen.
That'd make a good YouTube video.
Yes, it would. One thing that I wanted to wrap up with, since I know we're getting close to the end of the show, which, by the way, for everyone watching us, I will be on the Ray and Zach show today at noon. Zach is busy, so you'll get to see me again in just 15 minutes time, but hopefully you're enjoying the show today. I wanted to conclude by talking about something more positive. So thinking about the 2023 model year, which EVs do you feel represent the most value for the money going into 2023?
Yeah, well, so value for money, it's dependent on the price range. So if
Yeah,
we're
we
looking at
can
it
be on all
expensive,
over the price ranges. Yeah,
yeah,
all over
I,
the price range.
I think Rivian's got the best value for money in terms of you can do everything with one vehicle. I own an R1T, and every time I get into it, I'm blown away that it's S-Class levels of ride comfort to 911 levels of handling on a canyon road to Jeep levels of off-roading off-road. I mean, it does the spider chart of what that vehicle can do is massive. And so that's for 75 or 80 grand, whatever they're starting at. You just can't buy, you'd have to buy 5 cars to do what that one thing can do.
How does it compare to the F-150 Lightning?
Oh, they're totally different. You kind of
Okay.
need both if you want to work truck, use the F-150 because all your existing stuff bolts in. Lightning just is so much more comfortable, way bigger, and not sporty at all.
Okay.
So the F-150 is a truck. The Rivian's like a sports car, an off-roader, and like it's got a small bed in the back, but it's not really a hardcore truck. It's a lifestyle vehicle. And then used, good luck finding ones. But yeah, 2023, hopefully if you order one now, you'll get yours in that year, is my guess.
And
On the cheap end, I think Bolt. I think Bolt with the new pricing, that's the move. The only bad thing about Bolt is the slow DC fast charging, but really good range, pretty good AC charging, a lot of room, very comfortable. I think that might be the move for me. I've been recommending that car a ton. Another car to look into is the localized production Volkswagen ID4 built in
yeah.
Chattanooga. Going to be under $40,000 before incentives. 58 kilowatt hour battery pack, great charging, great car. High recommend from me.
Yeah, I've never been much of a GM guy, but I've got my eyes on the Equinox EV, mostly for its mass market appeal. I feel like that could be one of the most important, if not the most important EVs to make a debut in this decade. Uh, are you as excited as I am, or
Yeah, I
skeptical?
think that thing is just going to knock it out of the park. But in order to get like a nice one, you really got to spec it up. So, we'll have to see how it all plays out in terms of trim levels, how things feel. You'll, of course, see the reviews from our side and our competitors on YouTube, friends, competitors, friendly competition. So
Yeah,
can't
I
wait
even
for it.
I even had a little pseudo clickbaity title in my review of the Equinox details released because I don't think it's really going to cost 30,000 if you start to look at what people are going to want. Not to mention the fact that GM has said they're releasing a fleet variant, which I think will be the one closest to 30,000. I believe the Equinox still represents amazing value, but most buyers are going to end up spending 40 to 45,000 if you ask me, but still with the specs that were released, I think that would be a good deal.
Yep. Well, now's our chance to make electric less expensive, more accessible, and to get it out in the hands. But we need the chargers to work first. So that all hopefully will get sorted over the next 6 months. I think we'll see a huge increase in charging reliability, a much better vehicle purchasing market from a buyer side coming up soon. And yeah, looking forward to seeing what next year has in store for us.
Yeah, maybe we can have you back here in 2023 and see what's changed and what hasn't. And yeah, I really appreciate it today, Kyle. Thank you so much for being here with us. And I mean, everyone check out Out of Spec Studios. You want to go ahead and plug your content because it's amazing. I'm a
Oh,
huge
yeah.
fan.
Thanks. Well, no, thanks so much for being here. If you're into EVs, we have a specific channel I'd recommend called Out of Spec Reviews. On reviews, we cover infrastructure and some cars. But yeah, can't thank you enough for having me on the show. I'll be continuing to listen and watch, and you guys keep it up.
Thank you so much, Kyle. You guys check us out on the Ray and Zach channel in about 10 minutes. We'll be sharing some breaking news from Ford, and it is EV related. So it'll be my chance once and for all to bring up EVs on the main channel.
Oh, we didn't
So,
even talk about it on this one, but we'll get
yeah,
to it. You guys will
yeah.
get to it over there.
See you guys in 10 minutes. Thank you so much.